So I'm about to walk in and watch A Quiet Place Day One. I am excited for this movie, but also a little bit nervous about it as John Krasinski is not returning. But I do love the first two Quiet Place movies. I just don't want this one to be like an all-out massacre. And the first one made it so good, and the second one as well, is that it was more character-based and you cared about this family and it was smaller in scale. So this one's going like big in scale. I'm not sure what to make of that, but I'll let you know what I thought of it when I get out. Hi, my name is Nathan, and I talk about a bunch of movies on this channel. If you're new here, down below in the comment section, share what you thought of A Quiet Place Day 1 over on my channel. I have more content like this. Check those out once this video is over, and if you enjoy this video, click the like button and be sure to subscribe because that really does help a lot. With all that said, let's just get straight into it talking about the good. And I think the best thing that worked about this film is that it's a Quiet Place movie set in a new setting, and thus that just added a newer flavor, like something a bit fresh and new into the franchise that wasn't present in the previous two films. When it comes to the previous two Quiet Place films, it was all fixated on this one family set in isolation, set during day 472 or something. And this one is set in New York, which just gives it a different vibe, as New York is inherently a very crowded, very noisy space. It's set during, obviously, as the title would suggest, day one and the first few days of the alien apocalypse of this franchise. And so inherently, it's just a different flavor. You can tell it's in the same universe as the first two films, but it doesn't feel detached from them in any way. Whereas the first two films were smaller in scale, this one feels bigger in scale, but it still feels like it's set in the same world. And I was going into this movie a little bit skeptical because as it is larger in scale than the first two films and set during the first few days of the alien apocalypse, I just thought that maybe it would lose some of the character work from the first two Quiet Place movies because you cared so much about that family. And I thought the smaller scale was kind of what made the first two movies work so well. And this one's going all big in scale, where I was just afraid it was going to be like an all-out massacre. And an all-out massacre is not particularly what I want for this franchise. But this character had more this movie had more character work put into it than I was expecting. It's not about the family from the first film. It's about kind of these two lead characters in New York who find family with each other. And I think that's just a nice, different angle to explore the Quiet Place movies. And I just thought it worked in the context of this movie, in the context of the characters. So it still has quite a bit of character work in there that I wasn't expecting. Add to that, these movies just play really well in a theater. When you're in a theater watching these movies, it's better than watching them at home, as the movie theater is dark, and the sequences where the characters are trying their best to be quiet are just more tense in the theater than they would be at home. And I think this one is no exception to that. This one still is a great experience in the theater. And as a Quiet Place movie, there's just some solid thrills and performances. When it comes to the performances, our two leads here are Lupita Nyong'o, who's pretty much great in everything that she's in. But then you also get like Joseph Quinn. He's kind of a new up-and-coming actor. He was in Stranger Things Season 4. He just got casted as Human Torch Johnny Storm in MCU's Fantastic Four. And he gives a nice performance in this movie. And so, with this film, I thought it was a good enough prequel to A Quiet Place, but I did have quite a bit of problems with this movie, so let's move on to the bad. And while this movie still plays great in the theater, and it has the thrills that you expect from A Quiet Place movie, I think the big problem with this film is that because it's set in a new setting, in New York, with society, I think some of that actually removes a little bit of the tension. It's still tense when it needs to be, but the previous two films were just set in isolation, and during 400 days of this apocalypse, in this lived-in world, where there was always this lingering sense of doom. And this film just doesn't really have that. Maybe that's because it is set during day one, the aliens still just arrived to the planet, but I just never found it nearly as tense as the previous two films. And also, while this movie still has character work into it, I personally didn't particularly connect with the characters as I did in the previous two films. The characters in here, they're very different from the characters in the first two films. They kind of have their own history, their own backstory, but we don't get to explore that all that much. And so these moments of satisfaction you get later on in the film, I don't think were as impactful as they probably would have been in the first two films that I keep bringing up in this video. And also, I think another big problem with this movie is I just really felt a pacing issue. In the first half, it's quite fast-paced, I would say, where you get a bunch of thrills and more big sequences after big sequences, and in the second half, it kind of slows down. And throughout the entire second half, when our Joseph Quinn character comes in especially, and I just, because of the second half being a little bit more slow paced and having less thrills, I could definitely feel in the second half it was very creature light. It was not creature heavy. And even the first two films, they did have characters you cared about, and they still had the thrills, but they also never felt creature heavy. Again, maybe some of that is probably because the first two films are set in 400 days into the apocalypse, while this is just day one. But I didn't feel like it had that much tension, especially in the second half. There's all this talk going around between our two lead characters about like pizza, or throughout the entire movie, not just with the two characters, that they mean something to the character, but I didn't really connect with that character. Overall, I would say this is a good enough prequel to the Quiet Place movies, but it's not nearly as good as the first two films. It has all the things that you like about a Quiet Place movie, but I thought it also was a really flawed film. Overall, I'll give it a B-. If you like the Quiet Place movies, go see this one in the theater. It is worth checking out. But I thought it was a very flawed movie. It wasn't nearly as good as the first two films, but those are just my thoughts on the movie. Down in the comment section, share what you thought of A Quiet Place Day 1 over on my channel. More content like this, check those out right now. Thank you guys so much for sticking around to the end, and I will see you in the next one.